December 4, 1944. Hampton Roads Port, Virginia. The Liberty ship SS Benjamin eyed Wheeler groaned against the dock, its metal hull streaked with salt and grime from the Atlantic crossing. The winter wind cut through the harbor, sharp and clean, carrying with it the smell of oil, diesel, and roasting coffee from some unseen warehouse nearby. Down on the pier, American MPs in heavy wool coats waited, their rifles slung casually across their shoulders. The first group of German prisoners shuffled down the gangplank, thin men in tattered field grey uniforms, faces hollow from months of hunger and defeat. Their boots, worn smooth from the Italian mud, slapped awkwardly on the wooden boards. One of them, a 22-year-old tank gunner named Ernst Capell blinked against the sunlight reflecting off the water. Behind him, Oberleutnant Karl Mertens once commander of a Panzer IV platoon in the 26th Panzer Division, kept his chin high, eyes scanning the unfamiliar horizon. He had expected barbed wire, barking guards, maybe even jeering crowds. Instead, he saw American dockworkers laughing as they unloaded crates of fruit, machinery, and steel parts. Beyond the fences stood rows of gleaming trucks, massive olive-drab beasts, each one freshly painted and spotless, engines idling smoothly. Amerikanisch precision, muttered one of the men beside him, American precision. Mertens didn't answer. He was staring at one particular vehicle parked near the pier, a Sherman tank, its turret turned lazily toward the bay. What caught his attention wasn't its gun or armor. It was the radio antenna jutting confidently from the rear, swaying in the cold wind. Every tank had one. In Germany, such luxury was rare. In most panzer companies, only the command vehicle carried a working radio. The rest relied on flags, hand signals, and luck. Here, even a dockside Sherman had its own communication line. Mertens felt a slow unease crawl through his stomach. They were marched to a waiting train, clean, heated, and marked U.S. Army transportation. The seats were padded, the windows unbroken. One American guard, a sergeant with a Texan drawl, passed around packs of Lucky Strike cigarettes as if it were a gesture of goodwill. The prisoners hesitated, unsure if it was a trick. "Go on," the sergeant said. "You boys earned it. War's over for you anyway." Capell lit one and drew the smoke deep into his lungs. It burned sweetly. The man across from him whispered, "They give cigarettes to prisoners." "Maybe to keep us quiet," Merton said, but even he sounded uncertain. The train rumbled through endless farmland, fields of corn stubble, red barns, and telephone poles stretching to the horizon. At every crossing, they saw more cars, more trucks, more signs of life untouched by war. In Germany, such things were gone, turned to ash or twisted metal. After 2 days, they reached their destination, Camp Concordia, Kansas a sprawling compound of wooden barracks, mess halls, and recreation fields. Nearly 4,000 German POWs lived there under guard, but with surprising freedom. There were no whips, no starvation rations, no endless roll calls. When Merton stepped off the train, he smelled freshly baked bread from the camp kitchen. On the parade ground, an American tank unit was demonstrating maneuvers for new recruits. The noise drew the German prisoners like moths to flame. A row of Shermans roared to life, engines smooth as sewing machines. Their crews, young, laughing, chewing gum, climbed in with practiced ease. Mertens counted 7 tanks. 7 tanks, 7 radio antennas. He glanced at Capell, who stared open-mouthed as one crewman reached down beside his seat and pulled something that looked like a small lever. From a compartment inside the turret, the soldier retrieved a pack of cigarettes. They have cigarette dispensers," Capell stammered, disbelief etched on his face. The guard beside them grinned. "Keeps morale up, son." Mertens looked again at the tanks, at their abundance of radios, their comfort, their cleanliness. He realized in that moment that they were not just prisoners of war. They were witnesses to something larger. A world built on industry without exhaustion power without desperation. He thought of the long nights back in Italy, when his Panzer's radio had failed mid-battle, when ammunition was rationed to 3 shells per gun, when oil shortages left tanks abandoned in fields. Now, standing in the heart of America, he could almost feel the industrial heartbeat under his boots, steady, relentless, impossible to match. As the Shermans rolled past, one of the American crewmen saluted playfully and shouted, "Welcome to Kansas, fellas." For the first time, Mertens didn't feel defiant. He felt small. That night, as the lights of Camp Concordia flickered against the sky, he lay awake in his bunk, listening to the faint hum of distant machinery. It was the sound of a country that had never been bombed, never gone hungry, never stopped building. And for the first time, he understood why Germany would lose ***. The next morning, the bell rang at 600. It wasn't the blaring, punishing tone the Germans were used to. It was gentle, almost civil, followed by the smell of breakfast. The camp mess served eggs, bread, potatoes, and even butter. Some men stared at their plates in disbelief. Butter was something they hadn't seen since 1942. Oberleutnant Karl Mertens sat at a wooden table, his posture still rigid from habit. Around him, hundreds of POWs murmured quietly in German. Steam rose from tin mugs of coffee, real coffee, not the roasted barley substitute they used back home. Across the room, an American sergeant collected empty trays. "Eat up, boys," he said with a grin. "We got plenty where that came from. Plenty." That word strung. After breakfast, the prisoners were assigned to various duties: farming, carpentry, maintaining roads. They worked in groups under light supervision, no chains, no shouting guards. In the evenings, they could play soccer or read. The Red Cross delivered books in German, and the camp even allowed a makeshift orchestra. But what fascinated Mertens most were the machines. Every day he saw the Americans repairing trucks, tractors, and tanks with an ease that seemed impossible. The supply trucks that arrived weekly were overflowing with spare parts, fuel, and food. Nothing was rationed, nothing seemed scarce. He asked one of the guards, a young corporal named Jameson how many tanks America had built. The soldier scratched his chin. "Hard to say, sir. Tens of thousands, I guess. You blow one up, we make 2 more." Mertens forced a polite smile, but inside something twisted. Germany had once believed it could out-engineer anyone. Precision was their pride, tight tolerances, perfect gears and craftsmanship. But precision had become their weakness. The Americans didn't chase perfection, they chased production. One afternoon, Mertens was assigned to help clear debris near the motor pool. As he approached, he stopped dead in his tracks. A row of Sherman tanks sat under a corrugated steel roof. One of them had its turret open, and 2 mechanics were installing a new radio set inside. "Every vehicle has one," Jameson said proudly, noticing his stare. "Hell, even our jeeps can call in artillery." Mertens stepped closer. The radio unit gleamed, its dials and wires perfectly arranged. The Americans joked as they worked, their tools powered by an electric generator humming nearby. In the Panzer divisions, a single broken radio could ground an entire platoon. Here, it was as common as a shovel. But the final insult, the one that truly broke their pride, came days later during a demonstration for visiting officers. A column of Sherman tanks rolled across the practice field, their tracks clattering softly over frozen soil. One crewman leaned out of the turret and waved at the POWs. Mertens squinted. The soldier reached inside, pulled a small lever, and unbelievably, produced a cigarette from a built-in dispenser beside the radio. The German men laughed bitterly. "A cigarette machine inside a tank," one of them said. "And we fight with empty fuel cans and rusted optics," another muttered. "This is why they win. They make war comfortable." That night, as the wind howled across the plains, Mertens lay awake in his bunk again. He thought of the endless speeches they'd been fed, of German superiority, of the *1000-year Reich asterisk. Yet here, in the heart of America, he saw what real superiority looked like, a civilization that could outproduce fear itself. The Americans didn't just have tanks with radios. They had logistics, comfort and confidence asterisk. They could afford to make war human. Weeks passed. Winter softened. Camp life settled into a strange rhythm: work, meals, laughter. Some prisoners began to gain weight. They learned a few English words. They even traded wood carvings for chocolate bars from the guards. But Mertens, despite his calm demeanor, carried a quiet shame. He couldn't stop replaying the image of that tank, the lazy plume of smoke from a cigarette in the turret, the smooth voice on the radio, the unshakable ease of men who never doubted victory. It wasn't arrogance. It was faith in something bigger: their system, their machines, their country's limitless capacity. And for the first time, Mertens realized that Germany's defeat had begun long before the Allies crossed the Rhine. It had begun in the factories, in the comfort of those radio-equipped tanks, and in the relentless hum of an economy that never slept. By March, the Kansas plains had begun to thaw. The snow melted into deep furrows of mud around the camp's perimeter, and a smell of wet earth mixed with diesel drifted through the air. Beyond the wire fence, tractors tilled endless acres of farmland. The prisoners often paused during their outdoor work just to watch. For men who had grown up under rationing, the sight was surreal. The tractors were enormous, painted in glossy green, each one pulling plows wider than a panzer. They moved in perfect rhythm, guided by farmers who seemed almost casual in their wealth of fuel and parts. Ernst Capel, the young gunner, watched in silence. "You know what's strangest?" he said to Mertens. "They treat machines like toys, replace parts, throw away what breaks. We would have killed to save half this scrap." Mertens nodded slowly. He'd begun keeping a small notebook, jotting down everything he saw. The way the camp used electric light, even in barns. How each mess hall had a radio broadcasting swing music and war news. How Americans wasted nothing yet lacked the fear of running out. Fear, that was the difference. Germany had lived in fear of shortages, of bombings, of failure. America lived in abundance, and that abundance bred confidence. One afternoon, Mertens and several other officers were assigned to assist a local mechanic at the camp's motor depot. The man, Mr. Halpin, a jovial civilian with grease-stained hands, was rebuilding an old M4 Sherman for training use. He beckoned the Germans closer. "See this," he said, tapping the side of the tank with a wrench. "Brand new transmission, made in Detroit. They send us spares faster than we can use 'em." He tossed a greasy manual onto the engine deck. It was thick, illustrated, and written in plain English. "Every bolt, every pipe, standard size. You break one, you swap it out. Easy." Mertens flipped through the pages, fascinated despite himself. In Germany, every Panzer model seemed to have unique parts, complex, handcrafted, time-consuming. Here, everything was standardized. That word, standardized, haunted him. Halpin continued. "This one even had a cigarette dispenser model. Crew could pull one right from the dashboard. Not regulation, but morale's important. You boys ever had anything like that?" The prisoners exchanged uneasy smiles. Merton said quietly, "No, we had good optics, very precise, but no comfort." Halpin chuckled. Comfort wins wars too, son. Later that evening, after lights out, Mertens walked outside to the fence. Beyond the barbed wire, the vast American night stretched endlessly, unscarred by bombers, untouched by searchlights. A freight train thundered in the distance, its cars glowing faintly as it hauled something heavy eastward. Steel, coal, maybe more tanks. Each night it passed, and each night he imagined what it must be like to live in a nation that could fight a world war and still ship goods home like it was peacetime. In April, news spread through the camp. President Roosevelt was dead. The prisoners gathered in the yard, expecting chaos or fear. Instead, they saw the guards standing silent, caps removed. The radio played solemn music, but work continued. That same afternoon, an American captain addressed them. "The war's nearly over," he said. "For some of you, it already is. We'll treat you fair until you go home. That's a promise." Capel leaned to Mertens. "Even their grief doesn't stop them," he whispered. Mertens didn't reply. He couldn't stop thinking about the world outside the camp, the cities still building, the factories still glowing, the ships still crossing oceans. He realized then that even death itself couldn't halt that machinery of abundance. Weeks later, as word of Germany's surrender reached Kansas, some POWs cheered quietly, others wept. Mertens simply stood still, eyes unfocused. He thought back to that first day at the port, the glinting Sherman, the humming radios, the cigarettes, the symbols of a country that had made war into an industry of comfort and precision while his own had turned it into an act of desperation. That night, under a sky filled with unbroken stars, Mertens wrote a final line in his notebook. "We were trained to fight with pride. They were trained to build without fear. That is why we lost." Autumn 1946. Bremen, Germany. The ship that carried the prisoners home was American-built, of course, a Liberty vessel retrofitted to transport men instead of cargo. Its engines thudded steadily beneath the decks, a rhythm of power Mertens had grown accustomed to hearing. He leaned on the rail as the cold Atlantic spray hit his face, and for a long while he simply watched the horizon. Beside him, Ernst Capel smoked one of the last lucky strikes he'd saved from Kansas. "Strange, isn't it?" he said quietly. "We're going home, but it feels like we're leaving civilization." Mertens didn't answer. He thought of the camp's electric lights, the endless supply trains, the humming radios in every Sherman turret. He thought of the effortless abundance, the calm assurance of men who never feared scarcity. When they reached the German coast, the reality struck like a hammer. Bremen lay in ruins, half-burned skeletons of houses, twisted tram rails, and blackened churches piercing the grey sky. The air smelled of wet ashes and cold smoke. Their boots crunched over glass where once there had been shops. A child, barefoot and hollow-eyed, tugged at Capel's sleeve and asked, "Haben Sie Zigaretten?" Do you have cigarettes? Capel reached into his pocket and handed over his last American pack. The boy stared at the bright red and white label as though it were a treasure from another planet. In the days that followed, Mertens reported to the Allied processing station. There were forms, interrogations, and a ration card. He was assigned temporary quarters in a bombed-out school near Hanover. Each night, he walked through the ruins and listened to the silence of a country stripped bare, not just of walls and roofs, but of confidence. Where once had been the sound of marching boots and patriotic songs, there was only the creak of bicycles and the dull clatter of pots being repaired. But there was one sound that startled him, a faint hum, mechanical and familiar. He followed it down a side street and stopped in front of an open garage. Inside, a British officer was showing a group of German engineers an American Jeep engine asterisk. The men studied it closely, whispering to each other. "It runs smoother than ours," one said. "And simpler," another replied. Look at the bolts, interchangeable. Mertens watched in silence, that old ache returning to his chest. He realized then that the war had not ended. It had only changed shape. The new front was industrial reconstruction asterisk, and America had already won that battle before Germany even began. Weeks later, he traveled south to visit what was left of his hometown near Cologne. The railway bridges were gone, the fields untended. His mother's house had been flattened by a bombing raid. Yet in the distance, he saw something he hadn't expected, a convoy of US Army trucks unloading supplies. One soldier offered him a can of food and almost casually a cigarette. Mertens turned it over in his fingers. The same Lucky Strike logo, the same smooth paper. He took a slow drag and looked around at the ruins, at the silent faces, watching the Americans rebuild what they had destroyed. He felt no hatred, only exhaustion, and a strange sense of inevitability. In his mind, he heard again the easy voice of Sergeant Jameson from Kansas. "You blow one up, we make two more." That was the truth of it. The war had not been lost on the battlefield, but in the factory, in the quiet efficiency of men who could replace loss faster than Germany could imagine it. Mertens sat down on a broken wall and began writing once more in his notebook, the same one he had carried from the camp. His handwriting was shaky, but the words came easily now. We fought for an empire of scarcity. They fought for a system of abundance. We marched with flags. They advanced with factories. The day I saw a tank with a cigarette dispenser, I understood the future. He closed the notebook and stared out over the ruins of his country. The future, he knew, would belong to those who could build faster than they could destroy. And America, he thought, had already proven itself the undisputed master of both.